At 10:47 on a Thursday morning, my father texted me a photo of the house I had paid for, with a sold sign outside. He thought I was powerless. He had forgotten one document with my name on it. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought the hardest thing my family could do to me was make me feel like I mattered less than my sister. I was wrong. The hardest thing was realizing they had built an entire financial plan around the assumption that I would keep letting them. Before I tell you what happened with the house, you need to understand what that house meant to my family. It wasn't beautiful. At least, not in the way people mean when they call a house beautiful. It was a 2-story brick house on a quiet street outside Columbus, Ohio, built in 1986, with faded white shutters and a driveway that cracked in exactly the same place every winter. The kitchen cabinets were oak. The basement smelled faintly like dust no matter how often we cleaned it. The upstairs bathroom had one stubborn faucet that dripped all night if you didn't tighten it exactly right. But my mother loved that house. She had chosen the curtains herself. She planted hydrangeas along the front fence. She measured every birthday against that backyard. And after she died, my father kept saying the same thing. Your mother wanted this place to stay in the family. At the time I believed him. Welcome back to Calm Family Stories, where the quiet betrayals are often the ones that change everything. If you've ever been the person in your family who was expected to be responsible while everyone else got to be forgiven, stay with me. Because the picture of that sold sign was not the beginning of my family's betrayal. It was the part where they finally assumed I wouldn't fight back. To understand why, we have to go back to the winter when my mother died. She had cancer for 19 months. 19 months of hospital rooms, grocery bags full of medication, insurance calls, second opinions, and the strange routine families develop when illness becomes normal. My older sister, Natalie, visited often enough to be seen. I did everything else. I drove Mom to appointments. I handled the pharmacy. I learned the insurance portal password. I knew which nurse could get her anti-nausea medication quickly, and which one wanted the doctor's order faxed twice. Natalie had 2 young children then and always seemed to have a reason she couldn't stay long. Dad defended her every time. She has the kids. She's working. She's under pressure. I was always the one who was apparently not under pressure. When Mom died, Dad looked like a man who had forgotten how to occupy his own body. For a while I didn't expect anything from him. He was grieving. So was I. The house became unbearable for him. Every room had Mom in it. Her reading glasses on the kitchen counter. Her robe behind the bedroom door. The tiny ceramic bird she kept by the sink. 6 months after the funeral, Dad told me he had fallen behind on the mortgage. I knew the number before he said it. $23,400. He had drained most of his savings during Mom's treatment. I had savings because I was the boring one. I worked in commercial project management. I lived below my means. I had no children, no expensive hobbies, no credit card debt, and a habit my sister used to make fun of. I saved first and spent what was left. Dad called that being overly cautious. Natalie called it being lucky. Dad wanted to sell the house. That was the first time I felt something inside me crack. Sell it? He said he had no choice. He couldn't afford the mortgage, the property taxes, the repairs, and the insurance on one income. I asked how much he needed to keep it. He said roughly $25,000 immediately, then another $15,000 or $20,000 over the next year. I had $38,000 in savings. I remember sitting at the kitchen table where my mother used to sort coupons. Dad was across from me, staring at the floor. He said, "Your mother spent 35 years making this a home. I don't want to be the man who sells it 6 months after she died." That sentence did it. I offered him the money. Not as a gift. As a loan. I told him I would pay the mortgage directly if he agreed to put everything in writing. He hesitated. That should have been my first warning. Instead, I thought he was embarrassed. We went to an attorney. His name was Martin Hale. He was a friend of my mother's brother, and had handled some of Dad's paperwork over the years. Martin drafted a loan agreement. I would lend Dad $38,000 immediately. I would then cover the remaining mortgage payments and property taxes for the house, until the balance of the loan was repaid. In exchange, Dad agreed that I would have the beneficial interest in the property. The house would remain in his name for the time being because he was still the mortgage borrower. But the agreement made it clear that the money came from me, the payments came from me, and once the loan was satisfied, the house was supposed to be transferred to me. There was also a security document. A deed of trust. My name was on it. My father signed it. We notarized everything. Then Martin did something I didn't fully appreciate at the time. He recorded the deed of trust with the county recorder. I asked why. He said because if you are putting your savings into real estate, you don't protect yourself with a promise. You protect yourself with a recorded interest. I thought that was simply lawyer language. Years later, those words would be the difference between losing a house and losing everything. For the next 7 years I paid. I paid the mortgage. I paid the insurance. I paid property taxes. When the roof developed a leak, I paid for the repair. When the furnace died, I paid for the replacement. When the basement flooded after a spring storm, I paid for the cleanup. Dad lived there. I treated the house like mine. He treated it like something temporarily held in his name. At least that's what I thought. The first 2 years were actually peaceful. Dad seemed grateful. He would call me sometimes and say your mother would be proud. I held on to those words more tightly than I should have. Natalie was different. She never thanked me. She'd walk into the kitchen, look around and make little comments. You've really made this place comfortable. Must be nice not having rent. I always reminded her that I paid the mortgage. She'd laugh. I know, Claire. You love numbers. She said it like numbers were some strange obsession rather than the thing that had kept our family from losing the house. Then Natalie started having problems with money. Her husband, Eric, opened a small landscaping business that went badly during a 2-year stretch of unusually hot summers. They got behind on everything. Credit cards. Their car. Their own mortgage. Dad began helping them. First I didn't know. Then I noticed things. A transfer from his account. A new truck parked in Natalie's driveway. A mechanic's bill that somehow ended up on Dad's credit card. When I asked him about it, he shrugged. She's family. I remember staring at him. I am family too. He sighed. That's not what I meant. But it was what he meant. I knew it. He knew it. And something changed between us after that. Not loudly. Quietly. The kind of change that takes months to name. He stopped telling me things. Natalie started asking strangely specific questions. How long was the loan agreement? Did you actually have something recorded? Could Dad sell the house if he wanted to? I thought she was curious. I shouldn't have. One evening about 2 years before the sale, Natalie came over while Dad and I were fixing a cabinet door. She leaned against the counter and said, so, hypothetically, if Dad ever needed to sell the house, would he have to ask you? I looked at her. Why would he need to sell it? She shrugged. I'm just asking. Dad said it's not relevant. Natalie smiled. Okay, that was it. Or so I thought. The next spring, Dad told me something that sounded ordinary. He said he was thinking about refinancing. I asked why. He said he wanted lower payments. I told him that made sense. I didn't know then that the mortgage wasn't the problem. The house wasn't the problem. The problem was that Natalie had discovered how much equity was in it. And my father had started thinking about the house differently. Not as something my mother left behind. Not as something I had saved. As an asset. A large one. The house had increased in value by more than $200,000 since I first paid his mortgage. Suddenly, everyone became very interested in what the property was worth. Dad asked me whether I thought the neighborhood would continue appreciating. Natalie wanted to know what houses nearby were selling for. Eric started mentioning real estate investors. I noticed. I just didn't understand why. Then, in January of this year, Dad called me at lunch. He sounded excited. He said a developer had approached him about the house. I asked what developer. He gave me a company name. Northbridge Residential. They wanted to buy the property for cash. I immediately said no. Not because Dad had asked my permission. Because I was stunned he had even considered it. I reminded him of the agreement. He got defensive. I'm aware of the agreement. Then why are you talking to a buyer? Because I own the house. No, Dad. You hold title. That isn't the same thing. Silence. Then he said something I never forgot. Your lawyer taught you one little phrase and now you think you're a real estate attorney. I said Martin taught both of us what we signed. Dad hung up. For the next 3 weeks we barely spoke. I kept paying the mortgage. I kept working. I kept assuming that eventually he'd calm down. Then on a Tuesday morning, I got an email from a real estate agent asking whether I was available to discuss a property transaction involving my father. I thought it was spam. I deleted it. That afternoon, another message arrived. Then another. On Wednesday I called the agent. She sounded uncomfortable. She said she represented the buyer. I asked what buyer. She told me Northbridge Residential. I asked why she was contacting me. She said there appeared to be an outstanding recorded interest associated with the property, and they were trying to verify whether I had any claim. I asked her what she meant. She said, I don't think I'm supposed to explain the legal side, but your name is attached to the property records. My stomach dropped. I opened the county property database. There it was. The deed of trust. Recorded 7 years earlier. My name. My father's name. The property address. The original loan amount. I sat at my desk and stared at the screen. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt afraid. Because if the document was still there, why was a buyer contacting me? And then I saw the filing date. Northbridge had filed a notice relating to a pending sale. My father had already signed a purchase contract. He had been trying to sell the house. Without telling me. Without paying me. While I was still making payments. I called Dad. No answer. I called again. Nothing. Then I called Natalie. She answered immediately. What? I said, are you aware Dad is selling the house? Silence. Then she said he needs the money. The sentence was so casual that for a second I couldn't respond. What money? She sighed. Claire, don't start. Start what? You know things have been difficult. For who? She didn't answer. I asked whether her family was in financial trouble. Another silence. Then Natalie said something that made the whole thing click. You have enough. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I suddenly understood that, in her mind, this wasn't theft. It was redistribution. She thought my stability had become a family resource. I said, the house isn't Dad's to sell like that. Natalie replied, it has always been Dad's. And then she hung up. That was the moment I stopped hoping this was a misunderstanding. That night I called Martin Hale. He was older now, slower, but his memory was sharp. When I told him what was happening, he didn't sound surprised. He asked one question. Did he pay off the loan? No. Did he ever request a release of the deed of trust? No. Then Martin said he doesn't have a clean title to deliver. My father had forgotten one detail. Actually, he'd forgotten the most important one. The document he had signed 7 years earlier wasn't sitting in my filing cabinet. It wasn't in my house. It wasn't something he could claim he didn't know existed. It was recorded against the property. Public record. My name attached to it. The buyer's title company had found it. That was why the real estate agent called me. Northbridge didn't want the house with my claim attached to it. They wanted the title cleared. And my father couldn't clear it. Because I had not agreed to the sale. At that point I thought I understood the whole story. I was wrong. Because the next morning my father called me. He didn't apologize. He said, Claire, we need to fix this. I asked him what he had done. He said, I sold the house. You can't sell what you don't own outright. He said, I signed the papers. My name is on the deed. And mine is on the deed of trust. His voice got colder. That's just paperwork. I said, no. It's the paperwork. He went silent. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. You don't understand what this money is for. I asked him what it was for. He wouldn't tell me. I asked again. He said, it's for your sister. There it was. The real reason. Natalie was in trouble. Again. But this time it was bigger. She and Eric had accumulated nearly $70,000 in business debt. Their mortgage was behind. A lender was threatening foreclosure. Eric's company had failed. And somehow my father had decided the answer was the equity in the house I had spent 7 years paying for. I asked him whether Natalie knew. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Did you know Dad was selling the house to pay your debts? She said, I didn't ask him to. That was technically true. So I asked the next question. But you knew. She started crying. Claire, we're drowning. I said, so you thought the house could save you? She said, it's not just your house. I felt my hands go cold. What do you mean? She said, Dad built that house for Mom. I bought it back from him when he couldn't afford it. No. I corrected myself. I saved it. I paid for it. She said, that's not how Dad sees it. I asked, how does he see it? Her answer was quiet. As something he sacrificed for all of us. I didn't know what to say. Because that sentence sounded exactly like my father's logic. He sacrificed. Natalie sacrificed. Eric sacrificed. Everyone sacrificed. Except me, apparently. My sacrifice had become invisible because I had never announced it loudly enough. 2 days later, the buyer's attorney contacted Martin. The closing had been paused. The title company had found my recorded deed of trust. Northbridge would proceed only if the lien and my beneficial interests were resolved. That put my father in a position he had never expected to occupy. He needed me. Not emotionally. Legally. He needed my signature. My release. My cooperation. And for the first time in my life, the person everyone had treated as the dependable daughter had something nobody could take from her by simply asking. I had leverage. But I didn't want leverage. I wanted my family back. That was the part that made this so hard. I went to Dad's house. He opened the door but didn't invite me inside. We stood on the porch. He looked tired. Older. For a moment, he looked like the man sitting across from me at the kitchen table after Mom died. Then he said, just sign the release. I asked what I would get. He said, "You'll get your money back eventually." Eventually? He said the buyer's funds were needed to solve the family situation. I asked whose family. He said ours. I said, "Dad, I'm standing here telling you that I need the money you took from me, and your answer is that somebody else needs it more." He looked away. Then he said, "You're doing fine." I had heard those words before. You have enough. You're doing fine. You can handle it. Some people call that a compliment. In families like mine, it can be a sentence. It means everyone has decided your pain is affordable. I asked him whether Natalie had known about the sale from the beginning. He wouldn't answer. I walked away. That night Martin called. He said there was something I needed to know. The buyer's title company had asked for a complete payoff history connected to the deed of trust. Martin had supplied it. When the numbers were totaled, the outstanding balance wasn't what Dad had been telling me. It was much larger. Because he hadn't merely failed to pay down the original loan. He had also borrowed additional money from me twice over the years. Kitchen repairs, roof, furnace, taxes. Every one of those payments had been documented as advances against the property. The amount owed was now just under $90,000. I had forgotten about some of them, not because they didn't matter, because they had become normal. Martin said, "Claire, your father doesn't just owe you for the house. He owes you for almost everything that kept it standing." I sat in my apartment and looked at my bank statements. 7 years. Month after month. Automatic payments. Emergency transfers. Repair invoices. Thousands of dollars I had never celebrated because I thought I was helping my father. I calculated the total. I had paid more than $176,000 toward that property. The original agreement was only part of it. The rest had been additional secured advances. That was the first major turning point. The house I thought I had been helping save had actually been purchased almost entirely with my money. My father had been living inside an asset I funded, and now he had tried to sell it without me. The second turning point came the following Monday. I received a text from Natalie. "Can we meet?" I almost said no, but I agreed. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. She arrived without Eric. No makeup. No carefully arranged smile. She looked exhausted. For a few minutes we talked about nothing. Then she said, "Dad didn't tell you everything." I waited. She put her phone on the table. There was a photo. It was a copy of a handwritten letter. My mother's handwriting. My heart stopped. "Where did you get that?" Natalie said Dad had kept it in his desk. The letter had been written months before Mom died. It wasn't a will. It wasn't legal. But it was clearly my mother's handwriting. And it said, "Claire, I know how much you've done for this family. I also know your father will try to call it helping because that makes it easier for him to accept. The house should be yours. Not because you are my favorite. Not because your sister deserves less. Because you have carried more. And because one day I want you to have one place where nobody can tell you that you only belong there because they allow it." I had to put the letter down. I couldn't breathe properly. I asked Natalie why she was showing me this. She started crying. "Because Dad knows about it." I looked at her. "He knows." She nodded. "And he still tried to sell the house?" She said, "He told me Mom wrote it when she was sick." He said she wasn't thinking clearly. I felt something in me go completely still. My mother had died believing I would one day own that house. My father knew. And he had tried to sell it to rescue the daughter he had spent years prioritizing. I asked Natalie the question I had been avoiding. "Did you help him?" She looked down. "I didn't sign anything." "That's not what I asked." She was quiet. Then she said, "I helped him find the buyer." There are moments when betrayal becomes so clear that anger almost disappears. That was one of them. I asked why. She said, "Because I thought you would forgive me." I laughed softly. "You thought I would forgive you before you even knew whether I would be hurt?" She started crying harder. "I don't know. I didn't know what else to do." I told her there had always been something else to do. Get another job. Sell the business. Downsize. Ask the bank for help. Ask me. Her face changed. I said, "You could have asked me." She whispered, "You always say no now." That sentence told me more than anything else. Because it meant the family had noticed. I had stopped saying yes. That was the real problem. Not the house. Not the money. My boundaries. They had become inconvenient. I left the coffee shop without promising forgiveness. That night I spoke to a real estate attorney independent of Martin. Her name was Elena Ruiz. I gave her every document. The original agreement. The deed of trust. The payment records. The letter from Mom. The proposed sale contract that Dad had tried to keep hidden. Elena spent hours reviewing everything. Then she said something that changed how I thought about the situation. You don't need to prove that your father is a bad father. You need to prove what was agreed, what was paid, and what was recorded. That sentence saved me, because it pulled me out of the emotional courtroom in my head. I didn't need the internet to understand. I didn't need relatives to choose sides. I didn't need Dad to admit what he'd done. I needed documents. And I had them. The buyer eventually scheduled a meeting because their money was tied up and they wanted certainty. I attended with Elena. Dad was there. So was his attorney. Natalie sat in the back. The buyer's attorney put the documents on the table. He explained that his client was ready to purchase the property, but could not close while the recorded security interest remained unresolved. Then he looked at my father. Mr. Bennett, the release must come from Ms. Bennett. Dad said she'll sign it. I said no. It was the first time I had said no in a room full of lawyers. The buyer's attorney looked at me. Under what conditions would you release the interest? I looked at Dad. For 7 years, I had imagined a moment where I would finally force him to understand. But when it came, I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth stated plainly. I said, I want every dollar owed to me paid. I want written confirmation that the sale proceeds won't be transferred until my secured balance is satisfied. And I want the family to stop pretending this was ever an accident. Dad's attorney interrupted. This is a family matter. Elena said no. This is now a property transaction. Nobody spoke. My father looked at me. He said, how much? Elena slid the calculation sheet across the table. $91,840. The buyer asked whether Dad could satisfy it at closing. He couldn't. The room went silent. Then my father made the mistake that finally told me what his plan had been. He said, maybe Natalie can take out a loan. I stared at him. Even now, even then, he was still trying to solve the problem by moving the problem onto someone else. The buyer stood up. The deal is not closing today. And they left. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. Because that night Dad called and said he would sue me. He said I had destroyed his chance to save the family. He said I had humiliated him. He said my mother would be ashamed. That last sentence hurt. More than it should have. I didn't sleep. The next morning I called Elena and asked whether I had gone too far. She said no. Then she said something I'll never forget. You are confusing guilt with responsibility. They are not the same thing. You feel guilty because you were raised to carry everyone else's consequences. That doesn't mean those consequences belong to you. A week later, my father's situation collapsed. The bank discovered the pending sale. The tax situation on the property was reviewed. Natalie's debts came to light. Eric's business records were worse than she'd admitted. The buyer walked away. My father was left with a house he couldn't sell without paying me. Natalie was left with debts she couldn't hide. And I was left with something much stranger. A choice. I could force the house into litigation. I could demand every dollar immediately. I could let the family fight through lawyers for years. Or I could negotiate. I chose negotiation. Not because I had forgiven them. Because I realized something. I didn't want the house anymore. That surprised everyone, including me. I had spent years believing the house represented my mother's memory. But the truth was I didn't need the house to keep my mother. I needed the house to stop being used as proof that I was less important. So I told Dad I would release the property interest if he paid me the full secured balance from the eventual sale, and transferred a small parcel of land behind the house into my name. That parcel had been my mother's garden. It wasn't worth much, but it had value to me. Dad agreed. Only after his attorney explained that the other option was litigation. 6 weeks later, the house sold to a different buyer. At closing, my recorded interest was paid first. The money arrived in my account before the remaining proceeds were released. For the first time in 7 years, I watched a transfer from that property come to me instead of money going out of me. It was almost anticlimactic. No shouting. No victory music. Just a bank notification. Transfer completed. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I cried. Not because I had won. Because I realized how tired I had been. The garden parcel stayed with me. There were 3 hydrangea bushes still growing along the fence. I moved them to my backyard. One of them died. The other 2 survived. Natalie and I didn't speak for 3 months. Then she called. She said she had sold the business and was working 2 jobs. She said Eric had moved in with his brother. She said Dad was angry. I asked how she was. She said, I'm learning. I almost laughed. It was the first honest answer she'd ever given me. We started talking occasionally. Not like sisters from a television show. Not magically healed. Sometimes we still go weeks without speaking. Sometimes we talk for 2 hours. Sometimes one of us says something that brings the old anger back. But now there are boundaries. She doesn't ask for money. I don't offer it. Dad and I are different. We speak, but carefully. He eventually apologized. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. He never said, I stole from you. He said, I convinced myself that because you were capable you would always be okay. It wasn't enough. But it was the closest he had ever come to the truth. I told him being capable was never permission to take from me. He nodded. And for once he didn't argue. A year after the sale, I went back to the old property with my father. The new owners had renovated the front porch. The white shutters were gone. The oak cabinets had been replaced. The house looked better. And somehow it looked less like home. Dad stood beside me at the fence. He said, your mother would have loved the new kitchen. I smiled. Probably. Then he asked whether I regretted saving the house. I thought about it. No, I don't regret saving it. I regret believing saving something meant I had to keep sacrificing myself. He didn't answer. We stood there for a while. Then he said, you were always the one I could count on. That sentence would have broken the old version of me. The old Claire would have heard love. The new Claire heard expectation. So I said, you can count on me to keep my word. That's all. Not to rescue everyone. Not to pay for everyone. Not to disappear when they need someone blamed. Just to keep my word. And that was enough. The garden parcel is behind my house now. Every spring the hydrangeas return. The two that survived have grown larger than I expected. I don't know why that still surprises me. Maybe because for so long I thought survival had to look dramatic. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes survival looks like opening a bank statement and realizing nobody can make you hand over the money anymore. Sometimes it looks like saying no without explaining yourself for 40 minutes. Sometimes it looks like letting people be disappointed in you. And sometimes it looks like seeing a sold sign outside the house you thought represented your whole family and realizing that, actually, your family was never the building. It was the people who showed up honestly. My mother did. Even when she was dying. My sister eventually tried. My father is still learning. And I am finally learning something too. Being the responsible one doesn't mean being responsible for everyone. For years, I thought my father had sold a house. Now I understand what he was really trying to sell. The version of me that would always say yes. The version of me that believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. The version of me that thought if I just paid enough, helped enough, stayed quiet enough, the family would eventually see my value. They didn't. I did. And that had to be enough. ## final reflection. I used to think the document with my name on it was the thing that saved me. It wasn't. Protected my financial interest, yes. It stopped my father from quietly giving away something I had spent years paying for. But the real thing that saved me happened long before that document was used. It happened the first time I finally understood that a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It's an act of truth. My father forgot my name was on a piece of paper. I forgot my name was supposed to be on my own life. I don't anymore. Have you ever been the person in your family who was expected to be responsible because everyone knew you would probably say yes? And when did you finally decide that being dependable did not mean being available for everything? Tell me what you would have done in Claire's position. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who may need the reminder that protecting yourself is not the same thing as abandoning your family. Subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, boundaries, and the moments when people finally choose themselves.